start out with this question. Hey, why don't we? Hey, why don't we? And when Julie and I were first married, we were friends with another young couple. Neither of us had any children. And I don't remember which one of the four of us asked this question, but this was the question we asked. Hey, why don't we go canoeing? We should go on a canoe trip. And we lived in Miami, and there's a lot of canoeing in Miami. I mean, the ocean's right there, Biscayne Bay. And so we found a guided canoe trip. The Metro Park system had this thing. You could sign up, and you show up at the marina, and they've got a guide, and they've got a canoe. And so one Saturday morning, found the four of us in the canoes getting life vests and emergency safety instructions, both of which would turn out to be more important than we thought they were going to turn out to be. And you can kind of see where this story is headed. So we are following the guide. We leave the marina. We're paddling out into the water, into the bay, and it's going great. I mean, I've been in canoes before. Julie's been in canoes before. And the wind, this beautiful South Florida day, breeze is blowing at us, and the waves are not so big, and we're just paddling out. And Julie, when she saw the paddle on stage, she said, make sure you tell them it's your fault. I said, okay, honey. Okay, so this is what happened. We get about halfway, and we turn around to come back in, but the wind has picked up, and the waves have gotten a little bit bigger, and now instead of being nose into the wind, we're broadside into the wind, and then all of a sudden we're not broadside into the wind anymore. We're holding on to the side of the canoe because it's tipped over. Now, I don't know if you've ever tipped over a canoe in open water. It turns out that it is, in fact, possible, although not easy, to get the canoe upright and get the water out and clamber back in the canoe. I know that's possible because we managed to do that, and we stayed in the canoe maybe 2 more minutes before it flipped over again. So we went through the whole exercise and the whole routine. And then, I mean, again, I don't actually remember how many times we flipped over, but it was some number more than 3 between being in the open bay and being in the land. Now, what's going on here? I mean, we're trying to get to land. We can see it. It's right over there. The objective was very, very clear, and we were able to paddle out, but something changed. I mean, the wind picked up. There were these waves, and all of a sudden, we were pretty wet. Canoes can be tricky because the person in the front, who, just as I mentioned before, this was not her fault. She's paddling, and if she's paddling on the left, it's my job to paddle on the left or the right. Have you done this? I mean, if you've done this, you paddle on the left and the canoe turns. Have you done this? If you paddle on the left, the canoe turns right. And if you paddle on the right, it turns left. And if you do a J stroke, this is what they teach you in the Boy Scouts. You paddle perpendicular, and then you turn the paddle so that it's running parallel with the canoe, and you won't turn nearly as much. And if you're really in trouble, you can do this sort of backstroke deal, and the whole canoe will turn 90 degrees, which will just put you in the water that much faster. So the problem is not that we didn't know what to do. The problem is that we didn't know where we were going. We knew what to do. We knew where we're going. We just weren't working together really well as a team, and there were circumstances that were outside of our control. And it caused some problems in a pretty good story. Hey, why don't we? A lot of great stories start out that way. Now, I don't know if you've ever been canoeing. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I'm willing to bet that at some point you've been part of an organization, an event, something where you were trying to get an objective, and the objective was clear, but you couldn't agree on the work as a team. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you've been around church any more than like 5 minutes, you've been to a picnic where you played softball or volleyball or kickball. And what's the objective if you're playing softball, volleyball, or kickball? It's to win, right? So if you're on a team with people, you're trying to win. And there's always that one guy on the team who played in high school, who thinks that he knows better than everybody else what everyone else should be doing, right? And they might all have a different idea. He's trying to put people in positions, but there's not really a structure. You're just all trying to get along. And the teamwork doesn't really work that great. You ever play volleyball when there's 9 people and one guy says, I got it, when the ball comes over the net, and he runs from up in the front of the net all the way to the back because he doesn't trust the 4 people that are back there to be on his team. And then when he misses it, that's hilarious, right? We've all done that. Maybe you're not a sports person. Have you ever been to a wedding or planned a party? Have you ever helped to plan a wedding or a party? And you can't quite agree on what the tablecloth should be, or the centerpieces, or what food, or what time the thing should start. And weddings, especially weddings in the church, because we can disagree on some things that are common in weddings. So if you're a Southern Baptist and you're marrying an Italian, your grandfather might think it's a sin if there's alcohol at the wedding. The Italian grandfather, he's not sure it's a wedding if there's not alcohol there. And if you're a father, you've dreamed your whole life of dancing the first dance with your daughter, but you're marrying a Church of the Nazarene, and they may not do that. We have the same objective. We want to plan the party. We want to win the game. But our team just isn't working. One more example. This is one of my favorite ones. Have you ever helped somebody move? First of all, if you're going to move, just pay the money and hire a mover. But if you don't do that and you instead say, hey guys, you know what? I'll buy you pizza. We'll load the truck. It won't take that long. What's the problem with loading the truck when you're moving? It's how the stuff goes in the truck. You're playing Tetris trying to get the couch, the futon, the bed. Should the bed lay flat? Should it go on its side? The last move I did it this way, and you got 10 people, all with excellent intentions, trying to pack up the truck. The goal is completely clear. We got to get all the stuff in the truck so that we can drive it, and we only want to take one trip. Please, just one trip. But everybody's got a different idea how to get it done. And again, for the record, if you're moving, the person who knows how to put the stuff in the truck the best way is my wife. Just have her stand in the back. She was a missionary kid. They moved all the time. She can organize things into a truck better than anybody that I know. But somebody might think they can do it better. You'd be wrong, but you might think you could do it better. And that's how it works when we get together with teams. Now listen, all those things are relatively unimportant. We got a little bit wet in Biscayne Bay. Weddings are okay, but it's the marriage that's important. And if you have to take a second trip, I guess you can do it. But what about the stuff that's really important? What about things that are of ultimate significance? What about church? What's our objective in church? You guys ever read Matthew 28? Matthew 28 is pretty clear. Jesus is getting ready to go back into heaven. He says this, verse 19, go into all the world, make disciples, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That's objective is every bit as clear as I want to get the canoe from the middle of the bay to the land so I don't get eaten by a shark. The objective is clear. And at Brentwood Baptist, you've been around our system any length of time. You've heard somebody say this. We want to engage the whole person with the whole gospel of Jesus Christ, anywhere, anytime, with anybody. My son, he's 10 years old. He can say that because we say that all the time. That's just a different way of us saying the Great Commission. We are all about people coming to know God. That's what we do. And here at the church at Woodbine, we're in this season of relaunch and renewal, and we've said, hey, there are tens of thousands of people within walking distance, easy driving distance of here, of this building, who don't know God. We want them to know God. Understanding this objective is not hard. We want more people in heaven, less people in hell. No one is going to argue with me about the objective. We are all clear on the goal, and yet, Christians are maybe better at fighting and disagreeing than anybody else. And let's think about some of the things we fight about. I'm just going to give you, my dad was a pastor. I've been in church my whole life, so I've seen some great fights. Tell me if you've seen these church fights. The church is updating its sanctuary for a newer look and to serve more people, so they're going to take out the pews and put in chairs. Now that seems reasonable. People leave churches because of that kind of a decision. Because it's not church if there's pews. I don't know for sure, but I would presume there's probably other people that go to a church with pews and say, I'm not I'm not sure I want to go to that church because they've got pews and they don't have chairs. They're not maximizing the use of that building. But we fight about this. I was part of a church that did a remodel, great remodel, update. It was amazing. There was a stained glass window. Didn't make the cut. You know who else didn't make the cut? People that liked the stained glass window. People literally left the church because the window came down. There's people in their neighborhood going to hell right around them, and what they're concerned about is the window. What about paint? You know, we just repainted in here, and it looks great. And I was so thankful that no one came up to me and said, why did you choose that color? Because people leave churches for less reasons. But you know what we had to do to do the paint? And some of you will remember this. If you've been here longer than a couple months, we had flags from different countries all around this balcony. And they represented a season in the life of our church and a commitment to reaching the nations, to cultural diversity. We had missionaries in some of the countries where those flags were. We had students and people that the United States was not their home country. Their flags were represented. It was great. It had tremendous and significant meaning. Some of us really liked them. Some of us, not here as long, maybe significantly less invested. And we took them down because we're painting. And then somebody said, are they going to go back up? And the answer to that question was no. We're finding a different way to memorialize our commitment to different cultures. We're still working on that, by the way. That's not done, but it's in the works. That's happening behind the scenes. And so here's what happened. Here's what happened in that moment at the church at Woodbine. We took the flags down. Some of us would have preferred for them to go back up, but the same week they came down, I had families come to me and said, you know, I sort of like those, but the place looks so much better without them. We have a different preference. At least we didn't fight. I've told you before we moved here many years ago, we were involved in a multicultural, bilingual church, and we would fight about preference all the time. Maybe not fight, but if you speak two languages in your church, we spoke English and we spoke Spanish. Some people spoke English and Spanish. Some people spoke English or Spanish, which means every time you do an event, you're deciding which language is primary. Are we going to preach in Spanish and are we going to interpret into English? Are we going to preach in English and interpret into Spanish? And how often are we going to do one of those things or the other? Here's one in that same congregation. This is my introduction to a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. We had a service that started at 10:30, and it was a largely Hispanic community. So did the service start at 10:30? The service did not start at 10:30. Sometimes the pastor wouldn't be there at 10:30. I mean, we just started whenever. And that, can I tell you, that drove me just absolutely nuts. So there was a season and a period of time where I'm talking with one of the other leaders, the guy who's sort of running the show, and he said, listen, if we move it from 10:30 to 10:45, people will be on time. Juan, you are Cuban American. You're lying to me. You just don't know it. We moved it to 10:45. I think 20 years later, I think they still start at 11 something. I don't know when they start, but these are preferences, right? Sometimes we have it change. We move a pew, we take down a flag, we paint a wall, we change the carpet. Would anybody mind if we change this carpet? At some point, we're probably going to change the carpet. You're not going to argue about that. Please don't argue about the color or what we put down. We're not going to argue that it needs to be updated. And then sometimes we argue about preference. If we're going to have music, what language is the music going to be in? What's the style going to be? How loud? How soft? Which songs should we sing? Are they old songs? Are they new songs? Do we like hymns? Do we not like hymns? If I play a hymn and it doesn't sound like a hymn, does that count? I mean, I played in a worship band in the 80s. We plugged an electric bass guitar on stage. People left. There's drums on the stage of a church. Imagínate, can you imagine? Can you imagine that we would put drums on a stage in a church when Jesus only had a piano and an organ? I mean, crazy stuff. This is what we argue about. And in church, there's main things and there's secondary things. In the church in the United States today, people are divided on politics, on which ministry is the most important. Our objective is clear. More people in heaven, less people in hell. And yet, as Christians, we find all kinds of opportunities and excuses to argue with one another. And the question we want to deal with this morning is this one: how do we avoid arguing about stupid stuff? Okay, maybe not stupid, but unimportant. How can we get out of our own way? Because God wants to do something, and no one's fighting about the objective. We all know where we want to go. What trips us up, that's all on us. How can we get out of our own way? And what we find in Scripture is that there's a clear principle. It's always relevant. It's relevant in every season of the church. It's relevant in every relationship that you have. And it is especially relevant in times of transition, which is where we are. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be taking a little bit of a detour. We are not going to be preaching from our chronological Bible reading plan. That does not mean to stop reading along the chronological Bible reading plan. I want you to do that, and I'm going to confess and just give you permission. I was traveling this week. I am 1 week behind. If you're off the plan a little bit, God still loves you. The Bible hasn't changed. You can go back and catch this thing up. It's okay. But for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be preaching sermons that deal with transition, and specifically this season in the life of our church. And I'm going to preach this week. Pastor Fadi is going to preach next week, and then I'm going to close this out on the last Sunday of June before Hunter Melton comes to lead this congregation starting July 1st. And I'm going to warn you about today because I know you guys never know exactly what it is that I'm going to do when I come. Today, it's going to be worse than that because we're just going to do a lot of stuff. Today, we're going to look at 3 verses that teach us a very clear biblical principle. We're going to do some church math. I was on the math team in high school and in middle school because I am that guy. So we are going to do church math, New Testament algebra, and then, if that's not enough, I'm going to do my best to completely hijack 2 major multinational marketing campaigns, and then we're going to have communion. I mean, you're getting your money's worth today. We're just going to go. So buckle up and stand up because we're going to read the first 3 verses of Philippians chapter 2. Go ahead and stand up. The words are going to come up on the screen. And this is what the Apostle Paul writes to the church of Philippi. He says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, Paul's saying, if you're a Christian, this is what I want you to do. Make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Go ahead and have a seat. I want to set up this context because we've been spending all our time in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, you are probably familiar with the conversion and the life and the work of Paul. And Paul was a church planter, and we take a lot of our cues for how to run churches and how to act in a godly way from Paul, whose theology was as deep as it is practical. And Philippians is a very short letter that he wrote to a young church because all of the churches were young. And in Philippians, the primary theme of Philippians, when you read it, is joy. It's joy. I mean, if you read Philippians and get to the end and you're not happier, you missed it. Go back and start over. But in the middle of Paul being encouraging and giving an update on where he is and what he's been doing, he gives us some very practical principles. And what we find in Philippians is that not being on the same page is not a new problem because Paul is encouraging and admonishing the Philippian church to be unified. Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 to 3 is a very clear call to unity. And isn't that what we want? When we say we have this message, this objective, this commission that God has called us to, we don't want to be distracted by the stuff that's not important. We want to be unified. We never argue about the objective. I have never been in a church business meeting where someone says, I think we should concentrate less on lost people. I've never been a part of that meeting. If you're ever a part of that meeting, get up and leave. I give you permission. We argue over change. We argue over preference. And especially in seasons of transition, we run the risk of not being unified. The words that Paul uses could not be more relevant or timely. He says, be one in spirit and in purpose. I want to be that church. I want to be part of that church. One objective. And the Philippians clearly struggled, and Paul wanted them to have unity. So I want you to be of the same mind, the same spirit, the same purpose. And then he tells them how to do it. And can I warn you, you may not like it. Because it isn't a command for someone else. It's a command for each of us. Because Paul says the path to unity is humility. Because in humility, we are to consider others to be better than ourselves. When we come to the communion table in just a bit, I'm going to read some more verses from this passage, and what we find is that Paul gives us an example of humility. And the example is the example of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was God. Jesus Christ gave up deity to become human. And not only did he condescend to become human, he gave up his life for sinners like you and like me. Paul says, if you want unity, become humble. And if you want an example of humility, look at Jesus Christ, who gave his life for you. And you're going to argue about a pew or a stained glass window, or even what language you sing in, or how loud the music is? Is that really what we're going to do with the example that Christ has set? I don't think it should be. The solution to becoming unified is for each of us to give up our preferences to others. Because the goal is to advance the gospel, not win the argument. And at some point, my parents are probably going to watch this message because they like to stay in touch with what I'm doing. And I'm going to tell you what I was like as a child. Most of the time, I would like to think I was a pretty compliant, obedient child. And I think that my parents would tell you that same thing. Maybe sometime they'll visit and you can ask them. However, when there was a decision that was made that I didn't like, or something I thought we should do that wasn't being done, and I was firmly convinced that I was right and my parents were wrong, as respectfully as I could, I would just wear them out. I've told you before, I'm not a big personality profile guy, but that Enneagram one that's so trendy right now, there's one that's a challenger, it's an 8. That's what I am, and you're supposed to have a wing. You like have a main personality thing and then a wing. I don't have a wing. I'm like an 8 with a wing 8. Most people don't enjoy conflict. I run into it. I want to argue with you. I want to get in my way because, if it weren't right, God wouldn't have told me to do it that way. Whatever it is that I think, I just need to help you. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just explaining why I'm right. There's a t-shirt, right? And that's who I was as a kid. And we'd get all the way to the end, and my parents, to their credit, with this strong-willed, argumentative, challenger, little pipsqueak, they would never capitulate, but we get all the way to the end, and they'd always say the same thing. Have you ever thought about being a lawyer? Like, you actually seem like you would be pretty good at that. We're not changing our mind, but good effort. So the reason that I've spent so much time in Philippians chapter 2, and the reason I memorized these verses years ago is because when I'm telling you that the path to unity is through humility, and my finger is pointing this way, all the rest are pointing back at me, I struggle. I struggle when I don't get my way. Whether it's an unimportant thing or something that I think is important, humility is not something that comes naturally to any of us. Paul said he was the chief of sinners. I might be in second place when it comes to this particular sin. But if we want to achieve unity, it isn't something for someone else to do. It takes the effort of every one of us to give up our preferences, not to argue for the sake of arguing or being right, but to treat others as if they are better than we are. That's what Jesus did for us. Jesus didn't need to win an argument. Jesus served us in humility. This leads me to my church math. This is New Testament algebra. I was on the math team when I was a kid, and so I've never really gotten over my fascination with math. Did you guys ever do story problems or word problems? Yeah, okay. Not a lot of participation with the story or word problems, but here's how I think about this passage. Because in this passage, I can review a little bit of word problems with you, and then we're going to do something called the transitive property. You guys, okay, we're just going to get through it. All right, this is what we're going to do. All right, so we can approach any situation with one of two mindsets. We can come to any situation or decision from a position of pride or a position of humility. And so here is our position of pride. We have a decision to make. We have a priority to set. We have budget dollars to spend. We can spend money on women's ministry or on next gen, but not both. We can replace the carpet or update the bathroom, but not both. And people are going to have different opinions. But I come convinced that my opinion is the right opinion, because after all, God spoke that directly to me. And so how that works is this. What we're saying is that me is greater than we. That's the position of pride. Everything that I think, every preference that I have, not only is that the best way, it might actually be the only way. Whatever it is that God's spoken to you, no matter who it is that you are or where it is that you come from or what history informs your decision or your place in life, what I want is the most important thing. Me over we. And when we do that, what we have is conflict every time. If my preference is more important than the preference of the group, we will have conflict, always. This morning at 9:30, we had a meeting of our relaunch team. By the way, you all are invited to come to that. I might speak about that again in just a minute. But we started working through, hey, where has Woodbine been? Where has this church been? Where is it now and where is it going? And a brave person raised her hand and said, I don't think that we have experienced unity at our church. And I thought to myself, thank you for setting me up for what it is that we're about to say. So what are we saying when we don't have unity? Well, it could be that everybody but you is wrong. Or it could be that we're all wrong. But I think in general, when we have conflict, what that means is we have not treated others as better or more important than ourselves. Paul gives us a very clear path to unity. And there's only one word in the passage. Humility. What does it mean to give up my rights, my privileges, for the sake of a clear objective? So one way you can approach any decision, any priorities with pride, but you can also approach it with humility, in which case the me and the we flip, and our math starts to change. Because all of a sudden, what we want becomes more important than what I want. Humility equals we over me, and that equals unity. Over the next weeks and months and years, we are going to have multiple opportunities to start the equation with humility or with pride. And where we start will determine where we end up. You can't start with pride and end with unity. Now I'm going to bring you back to 8th grade because we have the transitive property, and this is what the transitive property is. If A equals B and B equals C, then A can also equal C. Just seeing if you guys are paying attention. So I can actually remove this and just say it this way. Humility will bring us unity every time. Now, I mentioned these relaunch meetings. You know, those are being led by Pastor Foddy. Pastor Foddy, who's with us today, and he's going to be with us the next few weeks, he's kind of the OG. I mean, he understands relaunches, revitalizations, renewal. I love when I'm with him because I learn something every time. Well, it's not true. If I open my mouth, I don't learn stuff. If I listen to him speak, I start to learn things, and that's what humility is. And you know what he said today? I've heard him say this multiple times. He says it doesn't matter how big a church is, how fast a church is growing. Every church needs renewal. And I want you to come to these meetings at 9:30 in the morning because I think the time that we're spending and investing that is really, really helpful for where we are in this season. We get to talk and share and kind of dream a little bit and spend some time praying. I mean, if you're not there, I really think you're missing out. Here's what I want to tell you about Pastor Foddy. You may not agree with him about everything. He might say something that you disagree with, and then what's going to be your posture? What's it going to be? I'm not saying you can't have a discussion. I'm not saying you can't have an interaction, but it's not necessarily my job to change your mind in everything. Jesus didn't do that. Pastor Hunter's going to start here. His first day on the job, Monday, July 1st. Pastor Hunter's great. I mean, I consider him a good friend. He's a great, great man. I really like him. He's probably going to want to do or change something, and you may not agree. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to try to get your way because you've been here longer, because you feel like you have more invested? That would be a very human tendency. Honestly, that's what I might try to do. But that's not what Paul says will drive us to the unity that we seek. So as putting this sermon together, I kept having this phrase run through my mind, and here's the phrase. When we're in a meeting and we're in a discussion and a decision has to be made, and one of us has to make the decision, there's a slogan that we can use that you might have heard before. We're just going to try it out, and the phrase is this: have it your way. Have you heard this anywhere? Have it your way. That's Burger King's slogan, right? So I have it right here. I mean, that's almost a different way of saying this same thing. I told you we were going to do a lot today, and we're not done, okay? So this is how I think we can navigate conflict, transition, and change well. I'm not saying we don't discuss or even disagree about essentials. What I am saying is in things that are non-essentials, you know what? If it's up to me, why not? Can I give way? Can I let you have it your way? You know what I like about that slogan? That slogan is from the point of view of the Burger King server. That's the dude making the hamburger, right? I mean, he's saying, you're the customer, whatever it is that you want, it's my job to serve you. That is a posture of humility. Then I started thinking about the other one. Here's McDonald's. McDonald's, their slogan is, I'm loving it. Fun fact. Justin Timberlake was paid $6 million to sing the original I'm Lovin' It slogan in 2003. That's how long this piece of marketing has been in your brain and in my brain. I'm loving it. Now, here's the issue with that. The McDonald's slogan is not about the employee giving the customer what he wants. It's all about the customer. Do you see the difference? Now, for fast food and hamburgers and McFlurries and Whoppers and sausage croissant with egg and cheese, the distinction may not be that important, but for us, it's really relevant. Because if my standard in church is that I have to love it, I'm going to suggest that you're never going to achieve unity. You just won't. Because everybody's standard is going to be just a little bit different. And if you've been coming here longer than a few months, you might have noticed something that's a little bit different in our church, which is that most people, almost all of us, sit in different seats each week. And the reason that we do that is because very early in my time as interim here, I challenged us to. And here's why. Because if I have to have my seat for me to love it, that doesn't let a visitor have it his way. When I come to church, my posture needs to be humble enough to serve others. And if you've ever been in a church where you sit down in a seat that you didn't know belonged to Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones or Mr. Henry, and had Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Smith or Mr. Henry sit behind you and stare daggers at the back of your head, I mean, you can feel that, right? So when we come to church, it's not about us loving it. I mean, I hope that we do. It is really about us coming together to give way in humility to other people so that we can create unity. So here's my challenge for you this week. I know that many of us will visit McDonald's or Burger King this week. I'm not judging you. As we're praying for forgiveness for the food that we are about to eat, why not pray the slogans? You've got a McCafe in your car on the way to work in the morning. Let's ask God that we would not try to make our church about us so that we would love it and it wouldn't serve just our preferences. You go to Burger King and you see that slogan, have it your way. God, we can ask when we're tempted to argue the point, when we're tempted to try to force our opinion on someone else. We do that at the expense of unity. God, will you help us be okay to be humble? We want to approach this season, especially in the life of transition of our church, with humility, not with pride. When we're arguing, we should get out of each other's way to give each other his or her way. So to help us remember to pray these prayers, I've arranged to have McDonald's and Burger King advertisements on TV. I've put their advertisements and their slogans on the radio. And I put a McDonald's and a Burger King within a 5-minute drive of anywhere that you are within the metropolitan Nashville area or in Williamson County. So wherever it is that you are, when you see McDonald's or when you see Burger King, it should be a reminder that what we want to drive forward to as a church is unity, because we have too big and important of a mission to get mired up and distracted by the things that are less important. We need to be out of our own way. Pastor Fadi this morning in this meeting that we had, and I think I mentioned this will be like my third time, you should come to this meeting. He talked about an image that he has in his head, and it's so funny because we haven't talked a lot about it, but I kind of see the same thing. I have this image in my head, a vision of where this church can go. We've got exciting, gifted, godly leadership. Our search team with Pastor Hunter hit a home run. I mean, he is the man for the moment. You know what'll stop us from going where God wants us to go? That would be us. That'd be us. We can completely destroy the trajectory that we are on, and Pride will do it every time. When it comes about my preference, my wants, my desires, my attachment, to any piece of history over and above our objective, we're going to lose. But when I stand up here, I can see the church in a way that you can't see because you're all looking this way and I'm kind of looking out that way. And I can see it full. All of you are still here. I want you to be here if you want to be here. And there's people from other campuses that join us because we got a ton of them. We already have some that are coming. They're like, Hunter Melton, I'm in. And they've already started to come. We're seeing them. In fact, last week we had one here. They said, we have a new pastor. And on the interim, they said, yeah, don't be offended, but we actually thought he started today. They're not back. So they'll be here first Sunday in July, and that's totally fine. My job is just to keep the thing moving until then and to challenge and admonish us with this. If we want people from the neighborhood in here, new people, which is the best part of the vision in my head, we don't get this equation right, we can totally sabotage that. We can go there if we go together. The path to unity is humility.